Welcome to the Pinelander Podcast, the official podcast of Pineland, broadcasting to you from an undisclosed location deep inside Pineland, where we discuss faith, family, finances, firearms, freedom, food, and everything else in between, with those who believe in living free and living out the values that made this country free. Welcome to the Pinelander Podcast. My name is Paul LaFavor. I'm here with my ranger buddy, Mike Blackburn. Today is Friday, the 4th of November, 2022, and we have back by popular demand in the G-Base, taking a knee, facing out, drinking water, NC Scout.
Welcome, NC Scout.
Thanks, brother.
Hey, yeah, we did the last episode. It's been quite a while.
Oh, yeah.
And it's still
half a year.
Yeah, and it's still enjoying a lot of downloads. So we just thought we needed to bring you back in. A lot has transpired since then, and so what's the word? You're out there. You got your ear to the ground. What's going on? What's on your mind today?
Well, you know, we've got Russia currently posturing for the real invasion of Ukraine. Which is, deeply concerning, probably deeply concerning to everybody. I think that we talked about early on, one of the first podcasts that I did with you guys, that a lot just didn't really seem to make sense about the posturing, the lead up to their invasion of Ukraine. And a lot really didn't make sense. And, that was back in February and we're getting towards the tail end of the year. And, they've suffered some significant losses, and really it's broken down in a very interesting way. But one of the most interesting things to me was the fact that it didn't seem like they were, using their professional forces, at least at the capacity that we've always anticipated they would perform. In all of the American Western military professional education, we assumed that the Russians will perform at a certain level of capability, and none of that seemed to be transpiring. And now they're staging for what looks like phase 2 of this mess in Ukraine. We have Starlink that's being pulled off the battlefield, at least for the time being. We'll see how that works out, which has been huge for the command and control capability, the targeting capability. But nobody can argue the fact that Ukraine is currently running out of munitions. And we're going to have a hard time resupplying those munitions. I mean, the HIMARS system, that all has a pretty significant lead time on resupply, and they're running low. The Javelins are running low. The Carl Gustavs are, definitely running low, and they had to pull the existing stocks out of our own arsenal and send them over. I mean, and that was just a month and a half ago that those rumors were proven to be true. And so really, it seems like to me that Russia kind of stepped back and said, hey, fire off everything you've got. And now they're staging for the real invasion. And you got Poland. That's
so sorry.
Go ahead,
Scott. I was just going to ask you, because you're getting ready to go into that. But from what I've been told by Don Lemon and his other folks. Now, I don't listen. I don't watch Don Lemon, by the way, but
Dr. Don Lemon.
Yeah, but it seems like all you're hearing is, hey, Russia's on the ropes, and they've got nobody. The conscripts are fleeing the country, so it seems like the other narrative is, hey, they're getting their butts kicked. So that's all we're hearing.
Well, I hear both sides, because I've heard that too. A lot of that I just chalk off to some pretty good propaganda.
Yeah. Right.
But the other part is, you're absolutely right. For those of us that came in the military during the Cold War, where the Soviet Union was the big boogeyman, Certainly Russia has not performed to expectations.
That's an understatement
from the West.
Right.
And so you're absolutely right. You're kind of sitting back here going, okay, was this all just a bunch of hype, or is there some kind of strategy we're not aware of? And I have also read similar articles that you're referring to now, where
Right.
a lot of these systems that we're providing them use up a lot of ammunition. We're going into our own wartime stockpiles. Those things are drawing down at a rapid pace. We're not backfilling those stockpiles quick enough, and at some point or another, you're absolutely right. The HIMARS is only cool when it's actually shooting rockets.
Right.
Once you run out of that, once you run out of the rockets, I mean, it's just a big piece of steel out there. So,
Interesting.
Is that kind of where we're at here? I mean, is there sort of a game being played here?
You know, it's looking as though, and this is just my estimation, because I was always taught, as undoubtedly, y'all were as well, and have taught others, that you never, ever, under any circumstances, underestimate an adversary. Never. It's better to overemphasize their capabilities on the ground than it is to say, or in the air, or their capabilities overall, than it is to say, we've got this in the bag, no worries. Our force projection capability is insurmountable. That's a very dangerous position to take. And that's one that a lot of people, I think that unfortunately a lot of our leaders, policymakers are currently taking. And that's very scary to me. When you're dealing with a nation that is as heavily nuclear armed as Russia is, as China is, and have the level of influence in the world and foreign policy as they do, and we're bringing the war right to the Russians' doorstep at the cost of potentially alienating other NATO allies, we're really putting ourselves in a precarious situation at that point, and a very potentially costly one. I pray that it doesn't, that is not a cost that we experience. But at the same time, it's very frustrating to hear so many people with a dismissive attitude thus far. The Don Lemons, the people in the media who've said, we've got the Russians on the run, they're getting beat. I mean, in a perfect world, I mean, I recognize fully they're an enemy nation, and we want to beat them, but at what cost? And at the same time, we cannot afford to underestimate their capability on the ground and their ability to strike us here at home, which, between both the Russians and the Chinese, they have a very long-term strategy that they're in placing here that I see, and a lot of it has to do with everything that's going on south of our border. That's a very, very important thing that we literally haven't paid much, if any, attention to. And it's just a really scary point that we're in. The State Department now. So just a few days ago, the State Department was saying they put out basically an opinion piece that said, hey, we have really screwed the pooch on everything going on south of the border. We need to refocus our efforts in Central America. But at this point, it's too little too late. You've got China, which has literally created infrastructure in all of the Caribbean nations. They have a presence in every single one of them, and their powerhouses in Cuba. You have Venezuela, which is just to the south of Cuba, which has a huge amount of influence as well. Now in Colombia. Colombia was the last American real, genuine ally in South America as a whole in the entirety of the continent. Now they have a dyed-in-the-wool communist who is the president, and he is literally right now bringing up war crimes tribunals within Colombia against the general officers of the Colombian military, because they had the longest running civil war anywhere in the world from the 1950s all the way up until last year. And it was never really positively concluded because you have ELN, which is being backed by the Venezuelans, as well as the Russians and the Chinese, which have kicked right back up because the FARC were the only ones who actually laid down their arms. And so now we have a leftist in charge who is not America friendly whatsoever, who is the power broker of the last holdout that we had, the last stronghold of American foreign policy in the Monroe Doctrine. And now we no longer have that. You go just to the north in Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, who was the leader of the Sandinistas and now is the president once more of Nicaragua. He is lock, stock, and two smoking barrels completely to or in the pocket of the Chinese, in the favor of the Chinese. The Chinese are building a replacement for the Panama Canal, which they also own the rights to, but they're building a replacement one currently in Nicaragua.
Right.
And he is set to become the hegemon of Central American politics. So the picture that's being painted here, Brazil, you had Bolsonaro, who was not necessarily America friendly, but he was not friendly to the idea of BRICS, right? So Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa as the proposed replacement to the US dollar as the world reserve currency. That's critically important for anybody that studies Econ 101. The reason that America can go into the debt that it goes into is because the U.S. Dollar is the world's reserve currency. But the second that doesn't, or that's no longer a thing, we're going to be in real trouble economically, and we're already in real trouble economically. They're posing a replacement for all of that. And how do you do that? You have to do that through the logistics. You have to do that through foreign policy influence. And America, and I really hate to say this, but America's policy over the past 30 years of strong arming people throughout the world into being part of the American hegemon is really problematic. And that's getting ready to kick us in a real bad way. That's pushed people right into, that's pushed the other favorable nations right into the arms of the Chinese, of the Russians. There's a reason that Russia was very quick to back the activities of the Chavez regime in Venezuela to the tune of building military equipment there and setting up a rather large factory there in order to do it in Cavim, which is located in Caracas, Venezuela. They licensed copies of the AK-100 series rifles and 7.62x39, which perform very well in jungle-type environments. So they're building 50,000 of these a year starting in 2019. The Chinese were all over it. If you look at Cuba, I've written extensively about this since 2018. Cuba has really become the hub of military activity of both the Chinese and the Russians. Now, when you look just to the west over into Mexico, northern Mexico has, everybody knows it for the cartels, but they have a huge presence of Chinese agents there as well. Phoenix TV, for anybody that's listening to this and wants to check the facts, Phoenix TV, which is the most powerful FM transmitter in the Northern Hemisphere, was bought by the Chinese government. And it is a Spanish language propaganda station. They set this up, right? Why would they do that? Why would they do all of these things? Because they are transmitting favorable information to their proxies. So now if you fast forward, and I wrote about that back in 2019, if you fast forward 3 years from then till now, look at our border crisis. We have armed people. There's nothing plausible any longer about any of this. There's footage out there. It was up on Fox News just a week ago. We've got footage of armed people coming across in camouflage. Okay, so, some of these are military uniforms. Some of these are commercial hunting pattern camo. It really doesn't matter when you have guys who are armed, they're wearing camo, they're coming across your border. I call that insurgents. I was in Iraq. I was in Afghanistan. That's an insurgent right there. That's enough to give us positive identification. And these are guys that are coming across that are armed. They're not even trying to hide this anymore. I think the problem where we are right now is that the Chinese know that this is how we take advantage of America. Because the Democrats have been so weak, not to turn this into a wholly political thing, but the Democrats have been so weak. Ideologically, they can't sit and turn on that, because if they do, they're betraying their own base. They know that there's a real problem and there's nothing that they can do about it. Because ideologically, they can't afford to turn on their own people. So now, the real danger that we have is that we've got Venezuelans, we've got Nicaraguans, we've got Hondurans, we've got El Salvadorans, we've got Cubans, we've got all of these people. And the intelligence report that was given to Congress 2 weeks ago said, it confirmed that these countries are emptying their prisons and they're sending these people to the border, right?
They're
what does that tell you?
Yeah, they're primarily military-aged males.
Right.
Which it seems odd.
They are preparing an insurgency, and this is being guided by the Chinese government. It's gray zone warfare. All right. So back a year ago, before Ukraine was a thing, you had a border dispute between Belarus and Poland. And it was over all of these Turks and Middle Easterners that were coming up. And, no country in Eastern Europe really wanted to deal with them because there's a lot of history there and cultural history and everything else. They didn't want to deal with them. So they were shuffling them north. Well, they finally get to Belarus. Belarus says, we don't want them. They're sending them over to Poland because they don't like Poland. Poland says, we don't want to deal with them. And it ignited a rather tense border dispute until they figured out what they were going to do with these people who were coming in. They were saying they were Syrian refugees. Syria's not really the hot zone anymore. So, whatever. And it ended up getting settled. But here we are a year later. They're still in the same boat. You've got Belarus and Poland, and Poland just recalled all their citizens. And Belarus is saying, hey, we're T-minus 90 days from getting involved in, Ukraine, and we may be pushing into Poland too. They kind of hinted at it. But that's an example of gray zone warfare. It is warfare that you are conducting without conducting kinetic operations. And so when we look at our own border of the invasion that's come across, and it's an invasion at this point, you can't dispute it. When you have that going on, this is a very precarious situation in which we find ourselves. And I'll throw one more data point out there since it's relevant. Just came across it today. So, I'm constantly, one of the cornerstone things that I teach is communications, improvised communications, tactical communications. And, there was a new radio that showed up on the market coming from China. It, is built to be rugged. It's got a lot of capability built into one package, and it's kind of on the expensive side. But I picked one up to see, for the own, my own intelligence assessment of it and see what's going on with it and its capabilities. And the very fascinating thing, this thing's called a TBR 119, which, is an interesting name too, because it's like
very familiar, doesn't it?
Right. But it interestingly, it's kind of like if a Prick 150 and a 117 had a baby and put them together. It's kind of like that. So this thing shows up. Very interestingly to me is that the instructions are all in Spanish. So they sent, from Hong Kong, they sent a radio to America that has some very interesting capabilities, frequency hopping, HF, digital mobile radio, some other interesting things that I've yet to dive into about it. It's clearly built for a military market, and the instructions were in Spanish. completely in Spanish.
And these are flooding the zone. These are flooding the southern border area.
Right. This is military equipment.
Just a coincidence, right?
Just a coincidence.
You know, I think you've brought up something that's important, which I think a lot of us, when we're looking at news, we're not linking it all together. So when we're talking about Ukraine, we just kind of keep it there. We don't consider China's involvement in what's going on between Russia and the West, how they're playing that. We don't tie in the southern border and what's going on with the southern border and the cartels, the actions of China in Central and South America and other places in Europe, the deals being made between Russia and China. I mean, there's really just a huge chessboard going on here. When you say, and we really need to start looking 100%. At all of it together.
It's the totality of the situation is beyond the grasp of a lot of people, I think. Because we, like you said, we look at things in terms of singular events. And a lot of that has to do with the news cycle. The way that in America, news is presented to us and we absorb it. We're consumers of it. When I was a kid, we had the 30-minute news cycle where, you saw the news at 6 o'clock or 6:30, and that was everything relevant that happened in the past 24 hours, and that was it. And now we have the 24-hour news cycle, which is bombarding us with this constant barrage of information. But at the same time, what it ended up doing was shortening our viewpoint. So we have this very myopic, short-term viewpoint on things. It was very fascinating to me when I went to Afghanistan, not so much in Iraq, but in Afghanistan. The Afghans would stop every single day and watch their one newscast that they had every afternoon. And it was the most important thing that they viewed. And this was just very fascinating because this reminded me of when I was growing up. It's the way things worked when I was a child that all of the old timers, my grandparents and everybody, they all did that because they were so in tune to it. And we don't do that anymore. And that owes that whole point is critical because it owes to the fact that we view things in singular manner. And we no longer have this long-term cultural view of where we are headed as a society, what's going on. Whether, and that's mutually exclusive, whether we were being lied to, weren't being lied to, whatever, it really doesn't matter. The point is that we no longer have the ability to discern the different things. And we don't know the difference between one thing or another. And so we're not putting all of this together. The kaleidoscope is seeing all the different colors, and we're just not putting the picture together. But the picture is that China is following a very specific set of guidelines. Anybody that wants to look deep into this need to read the two Chinese colonels that wrote Unrestricted Warfare back in the late 90s. I think it was 1997. And I apologize for being kind of off the cuff. I don't recall their names, but they were two Chinese colonels that were lecturers at the Chinese People's Liberation Army version of West Point. They laid out a very specific plan of what they were going to do to take down the West and usher in the Chinese New Century, because that is their goal. That is Xi Jinping's goal, is to usher in the Chinese New Century and to begin year zero, right? Because they're communists, and that is what communists believe. And to be fair, they're really not a great ally of the Russians either. The Sino-Soviet split's still a thing because Russia is not a communist nation. But at the same time, they realize that they need them as an ally for the European front, that they can't take on a war on all fronts at once. They need the Russians. The Russians are going to end up fighting the Chinese too. It's very reciprocal in that regard. They're not necessarily friendly with one another, but right now they're allies out of necessity because they are unified against the United States.
The enemy of the enemy is my friend, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. You brought up something earlier, which I think needs to be discussed, and that's the dollar and the fact that a lot of people that are extremely smart, much smarter than I am, people like Ed Dowd and people that have worked on Wall Street their whole life, really understand markets and the finances. Have made an awful lot of money predicting markets and future trends. Have said that the Federal Reserve is really run out of time. It's come to its 109-year expiration date, and the ability for them to get themselves out of the current mess that they've put themselves in is questionable. And that a lot of the events that we're seeing take place also benefit the bankers because if the dollar does collapse, which a lot of people again are saying that it's inevitable, it's a fiat currency like every other fiat currency. I mean, it has a time, it has an expiration date. They're not going to want to assume the blame on this, and they're anything at all that they can blame it on, pandemics, world wars, whatever kind of instability, it allows them to have a scapegoat for their own failed banking policies. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, one thing Ed Dowd said that really rung true to me was, he says, now is the time to really start developing your communities and not just friends, people who are like-minded.
Right.
It's critical. You really need to know where people stand, and you need to start developing these communities and these networks. You need to be where these people are, and you need to start putting together how you're going to get through this together, because it is going to take these small communities to get through what these people describe if the dollar does fail.
Right. I don't disagree with any of that. As far as the life cycle of the Fed, I mean, I'm not an economist. However, you can't make money with a mountain of debt. It's not. This is asinine, and we seem to just keep sinking ourselves into more debt. We had officials from the Fed that have said on record, multiple ones that have said, well, we can just print more money. I mean, Alan Greenspan is very famous for saying that, but Janet Yellen's also said that. We can just print more money. A fiat currency at that point is not, I mean, again, I'm not an economist. I mean, I have a level of education, but it's in sociology. So I understand basic economics, but I also understand being a business owner and somebody who's paid off his own home and does pretty well. I understand that the fact that you can't make money from nothing, but at the same time, you also can't continue to strong arm everyone in the world. If you have a bunch of friends that come to a party and you show yourself to all of them and act like you don't need any of them, or that you're better than them, and you constantly do this, eventually you're going to find yourself with no friends at the table. They don't want to come. They don't want to come to your party. They don't want to hang out with you. And that's where America has found itself right now. We've turned our backs on every ally that we had in the world. And with Nord Stream 2 getting attacked, And, they wink, wink, nod, nod at that. And we don't know what happened with that. Well, how is Germany going to heat itself this winter? I mean, that's a serious question when you look at Carver and do a Carver matrix on this. This is pretty serious. And then there was another attack on a pipeline that was foiled in Turkey. That sends a very clear message to American allies. Whether America was implicitly responsible in the shadows or not, it doesn't matter. It shows a very real message that maybe we can't protect you. Maybe that we can't protect, we can't provide for you in the long term. And so how that translates to people in getting into their communities right now and getting engaged, what they're going to find as things go further and further down the pipe is there's going to be a lot more people who are going to become very outspoken in their beliefs and very outspoken in, maybe DC, Washington, DC is not what we need to focus on. We're already seeing the beginning of this. And through people becoming more outspoken and through people getting training, because they need that. It's one thing to have your heart in the right place. It's another to put metal in the meat and get out there and start doing things. Quit with a hypothetical. Get out there and start doing something. Start training. And we're headed towards that. We're rapidly headed towards that. So I promise you, there's a lot of people in your community. One of the neat things that I see in teaching class, and my voice is a little jacked up right now. I just got done with a 6-day intensive small unit tactics course. It was 2 of them back to back, where it was the basic course and then the advanced course after that. And having in both of those classes, having well over a platoon sized element in both of those classes, watching these guys come together was truly incredible. But the thing that was most incredible about it was the fact that there were guys there who were from very close communities to one another and had no idea. They didn't even know that each other even existed. There were guys that I had. There was one crew that came down. It was a group of guys. Some of them were in law enforcement. Really, really awesome guys. They came down and they trained with me in the past. They come down. And then lo and behold, there's another group from Virginia that's there. And so now they get to talking. Once, we were done for the day, they start talking and I'm kind of listening to their conversation. They don't live that far from one another. And now all of a sudden, organically, they're coming up with their own training schedule saying, hey, exchange contact information. Hey guys, we're going to meet at the range. I've got this place over here. This is what it was very, very neat to see all of this coalescing in a very short amount of time. And that's something that I've been able to get a front row seat to over the years in doing this through all the classes that I've done. And I'm going to tell you that, for anybody out there that kind of gets what I call that black pill effect of saying, things are hopeless and I throw up my hands. I don't really know what's going on. I'm going to tell you something. Get out to a class. It doesn't have to be mine. I mean, I'm in business doing that. There's a lot of great guys that are training good skills out there. You go out to one of those classes and you're going to find, I promise you, you're going to find people who are like-minded and probably in your same general vicinity as well. And that's how groups now are beginning to coalesce. And it's not some crazy, underground that's being formed for any sort of nefarious purpose. It's people saying, hey, you know what? The spirit of the Second Amendment in this country has to do not just with owning firearms. It has to do with being well regulated, which means being well trained. It means getting out there and it means doing something about it and saying, you know what? Nah, I'm not going to be oppressed. I'm not going to be kept down. You're not going to tell me you're not going to put your edicts over on us. We're not going to do that anymore. That's how you ensure freedom in America. And that's what we're headed towards it's people. It's very easy for people to get negative about stuff. And I'm here trying to, as best that I can, to say, that there's a very good positive that's coming out of all this as well. And
yeah, I think it's
for one, embrace it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. I think it's really just getting back to the basics. I mean, what do you think, Paul? I mean, these are the types of activities that you're discussing right now really would be commonplace in colonial America, where families took responsibility. They wanted to make sure they could defend themselves. They were self-sufficient. They had to rely on neighbors and community. They had to really just be in touch with nature and what's going on in the environment and what's going on, because there's no cavalry coming to your rescue.
Yeah, that's something that, unless you've been under a rock for the last decade, our country has done some not so good things in politics, not so good decisions. And I have, the last 10 years, I've looked at all of this and kind of watched it all. And I've been reminded that there isn't going to be, like you said, somebody, the cavalry coming to the rescue. And I think it happened when my house was broken into. It was back in 2014. And my wife and daughters were somewhere else, thank God. And I was just working. And I came home and the front doors was kicked open. And I was like, okay. So then I cleared the whole house, and I did like anyone else would do. I called 911. It took about 38 minutes. This was 2014.
In a large metropolitan area.
And I was like, okay, this was the older G base. Okay, like 2 G bases back. But I thought, wow. And that's when I thought I need to get my crap together. And around 2014, we were well into wokeism. Wokeism was they didn't call it wokeism back then, but
PC whatever.
But we had PC, we had Obama, we had all that great stuff going on, and then I was like, wow, yeah, I need to get my head on a swivel and look at my security plan, look at what's my back, everything. All the things that we need to be looking at now is, hey, are you taking care of your family? Do you have security? Are you thinking about these things? Because nobody else is going to, just fast rope out of the forest to help
perfect
you.
Example. Another perfect example. What's dominating the news cycle right now, at least here in North Carolina, yesterday in Raleigh, they have a mass shooting.
Yeah.
What they're calling a mass shooting. It's very tragic. I was just having a discussion a little while ago about that. Somebody was kind of asking my thoughts on the breakdown of the whole thing. Not that it really matters that much in the big scheme of things, but you have a kid who's armed, right, with apparently a duck gun, shotgun, long-barreled shotgun or whatever it was, and he's approached by an off-duty cop. But this is in Raleigh, and it's in a residential area of Raleigh, which is significant, very significant. Yeah. And unfortunately, 5 people ended up losing their lives. That sucks. But when you take into account other areas in North Carolina, Fayetteville being one, all of us are very intimately familiar with. I mean, I had my house broken into as well when I was living just outside of Spring Lake when I was stationed at Bragg, and it was, we weren't home at the time, but it was a particularly violent one, and there were things going on, and so the sheriff of Harnett County at the time held a town hall saying, hey, my deputies don't have the resources to protect you. So when we see that breakdown of the mass shooting they had in Raleigh yesterday and how many resources they diverted to that, which, I get it. It is kind of a dramatic thing. At the same time, though, I mean, and it's very unfortunate 5 people lost their lives, but how many people get shot in the urban areas in North Carolina alone on a weekly basis? It's, it exceeds that number by a significant margin. I can say for sure Greensboro and High Point and Winston-Salem have a significantly higher rate of the number of shootings that occur on a week-to-week basis. point is behind all this is not to diminish that at all. It's the complete opposite. It's a tragedy. But the way that this thing went down in the middle of the day, I mean, one off-duty officer, which, God rest his soul, went out there. He manned up. This kid's carrying a gun. This is kind of suspicious. And he went out there and confronted him. But had there been a couple other armed people there, and I get it, it's later in the day. There's not that many people home. It's a working class neighborhood where people have got their 9-to-5 jobs. But if a couple other people had seen that, I said, man, that's a little odd. And they had drawn down on that guy. And now all of a sudden you got 3 or 4 guns in the fight rather than one off-duty cop. And it's a 1-to-1. One guy shows up. He's ready for the fight. The other guy is confronting him thinking, man, maybe I can talk him down. Obviously, that's the way that it went. And to the bigger point about all that is look at how many resources they diverted to one guy who is shooting. If you think about this on a mass scale, we've already seen a preview to this. We've seen Antifa in Portland and in Seattle. We've seen them in other urban areas. And they're all over social media right now, operating with impunity, especially on Twitter, saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're just waiting for the time. To go back to what we were talking about in the very first section, so now you have a armed insurgency that's come across, and even if down at the border, because it's not just down at the border, it's everywhere. It's everywhere now. These people hit the border, they get picked up, they're gone, right? And they're going to every corner of the United States. Even if just a handful out of the thousands that are coming across, we'll say 1 out of every 100 comes across, and he has just rudimentary training in organization, in targeting, understanding F3EA, understanding Carver, understanding Sweat MC, because I know that they're all taught this. They're all taught unconventional warfare. In all of these schools that are training spies, training insurgents, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, the Russians, the old hands of the KGB, right? The Directorate of Intelligence coming out of Cuba, they all got the same training. And if 1 out of every 100 has that level of training to be able to go and multiply his efforts with everybody else, all his contemporaries that are around him, they could very quickly, and this is both a scary thing, but it's also a call to your own training, to take it seriously. They could very quickly overwhelm the infrastructure that we have. If one guy, let's think about this, if one guy diverted that many resources of law enforcement, of EMS, of our emergency response capability with 5 people getting shot, which it is a mass casualty incident, but I've seen way bigger. I know y'all have too. If that's what overwhelms our system, and I talked about this last night with a doctor, a local doctor. He's a friend of mine who works in the ED, and it's very, very quick to overwhelm our emergency response capability. If they were planning something like this, and they set a plan in motion like this, and there's nothing saying that they're not, the Chinese are sitting back and waiting, and they're looking at the effect. What would the response be? If we see the level of incompetence coming out of leadership at all levels, and really even worse, the duplicity of the message. We had the mayor of Raleigh last night who I watched a couple of minutes of her press interview, and I had to cut it off because this woman's an idiot. But she ran on defunding the police. If you go back and you look at her campaign ads, everything was defund the police. Everything was demonizing. Everything was all of the talking points of the day. And the very first thing that she can do when she gets up there, the wonderful heroes of the Raleigh Police Department. I mean, this you can't even stay on your own message. You can't even stay on your own message. And yeah, and I'm faulting her for that. I 100% am, because she ran on one thing and now she's up there, she's saying something different, and not even in a coherent way. Think about that. These are the people who are managing and overseeing our infrastructure. You need to take a very hard, sober look at the people who are overwatching our infrastructure and who are in charge of writing the policy, because these are the people who are it. They can't make up their minds. They're inherently incompetent. And that's why you need to take it upon yourself to take every opportunity to get yourself prepared, find that training, and work on those skills, because you're not going to get a second chance.
Yeah, I think that's important, that people, there's a lot of people sitting on the sidelines. I mean, I was probably guilty for it as well. I mean, you're sitting back there and you're going, man, things are looking kind of rough out there. But I think I got some time. You know, they're getting rough, but you know, I'll do that next year.
Yeah.
And really,
procrastinators unite tomorrow.
Because a lot of this stuff, it takes commitment. Okay. I mean, it takes some life-changing actions. Okay. And they're hard muscle moves. Okay. It's heavy lifting. Some of this stuff requires some heavy lifting. And you have to change your lifestyle, and that's no one likes change. Change sucks. We get kind of in our routine, but I think there's a bunch of us kind of sitting out there in that same sort of boat, but really, you know, at some point or another, you're looking out and you're going, damn, I ain't got much time left. I mean, I better get up and start doing some stuff. So, we've talked about this before, you know, learn to plant a garden, you know, throw some chickens out in the freaking yard. Try to, get out of debt, pay some things off, downsize, try to, develop your communities, try to, you know, sit around and say, hey, you know, if I provide this, can you provide that? And make some connections, get right with God. I mean,
know some people in the neighborhood.
Well, whatever, because I look back, network. You know, Paul and I spent time in Iraq. I mean, you did too. I mean, when things go to crap in the country, I mean, the first thing you see is all the Sunnis getting together and all the Shias getting together. I mean, that's just natural. Right. You know, everyone goes tribal, and that's for survival. And there's going to be a huge group in this country that's just not going to do anything. They're not going to prepare. They're going to be a mess. So you have to be aware of that. You got to be aware of a whole bunch of, you know, hungry, unprepared people, and that's going to be a problem. Then you're going to have, of course, the people who, you know, are just zealous for their dystopian new world order, that are just motivated about bringing it all in. Right. You're going to be battling them guys. So, you know, you really have to kind of war game this thing out a little bit, get with your better half and kind of figure out, take baby steps now, like you're talking about, do some training, buy what you need to buy, a little every month, whatever. And it'll make you feel better. Your thoughts?
Oh yeah. So one of the things you said that was extremely significant was get right with God and meet the people in your community. And both of you know the very easy answer to that. Mm-hmm. Go to church. Yeah. That's the best way to do them both in one place. Go to church. And here's another thing. Early on, when I started teaching classes, and I was in a, you know, and I've told you guys this, it was completely accidental. You know, when I got out of the Army, I took the uniform off, hung it up, and it was kind of just like in the background. It was something that I used to do, and I had moved on with life. It was something else, you know, and I had moved on to a whole other thing. And kept kind of getting pushed back in different stuff. And then, I hit a point in my life where I had to start writing as a creative outlet, because I just felt this presence. That, I felt like I was being commanded to start writing stuff that I knew, the original brush reader block, and to start writing things that I thought would help people, conveying whatever kind of knowledge, whatever I could share would help people. And it was a very good creative outlet for me too at that point in my life. And, then I got kind of pushed down the path of starting to teach classes. I had so many people that were saying, hey, would you teach us a little bit about this communication stuff? Would you teach us a little bit about small unit tactics? And so on and so forth. And it just, I started building these POIs for different classes, never really intending to make any money or, turn it into a business. And it just, it was very providential how it all occurred. But the point behind it is that very early on, I had a good friend of mine. He's a devout Catholic. And he told me something that was very significant and stayed with me for all these years since I started back in 2017. He said, you always tell the best quality people by the first guy that's in the church parking lot. And if he comes in and he makes coffee in the morning, if he makes coffee for the congregation, that's a great guy. And that's a guy that you want to talk to. And everybody else wants to talk to as well. And I thought that was extremely significant. I'm not Catholic, but that doesn't have anything to do with it. Every church is like that. Every church has those people who show up and they're kind of going through the routine. And I say, they're the Sunday Christians. They're the church is a social activity Christians. Then you have the people that actually embody it, and they know why they want to be there, and they're actively engaged with their community. And those are the people that you really want to be around. And it never fails. That guy that's making the coffee, that guy that's always up first. The same principle could be said of an infantry squad leader, the very first guy that's at the company every morning. That's your most switched on NCO. When you see that first guy that walks in the company and he's there and he's at the unit, he's there, but before the lights are even on, and he's ready to go. Maybe he's doing his warm-ups out there and he's waiting for his guys, and then he walks over and he checks the barracks. It's the same principle. Those are the guys, those are the ones in your community that are the most serious. And everybody's task at that point begins cultivating that. How do you cultivate that? First, you have to recognize that. Well, now you know how to recognize it. Now you cultivate it. And so the people that need to get right with God, they need to find themselves putting themselves in church, listening to the message, but most importantly, looking around at your community, because that's your community. That's how you build that. Those are the critical elements right there. From there, every other shortcoming can be overcome with training. So you say, oh, well, they don't know how to do this. They don't know how to set up radio stuff. They don't know how to shoot. They don't know how to do small unit tactics. So what? You can overcome that with training. That's where training comes in, right? They know that they already have the underlying principles, and they recognize that, and they know what they are. Your job at that point becomes coming up with an adequate training plan for them. And I have a lot of people who come across my desk that are in that very same boat, and a lot of people who leave when they come up here for a class and they turn around and they leave, that are emboldened. They say, hey, we've got hope now. That's where you want to be.
That's a great advice, Scout. And I think these types of where our country has gone has forced us to think this way. And we need to go back to our roots, back to really, in some sense, the founding of this nation. Have love God, fear evil, and fear God, hate evil, and then know your neighbors, right? And live out what you believe.
Work on the family. That's going to be your family is extremely important, and you never need to lose sight of that. Figure out what's real important in life. Hey, listen, what do you have going on? What's on the calendar up there at NC Scoutland? What classes you got going on? What's the best way people can get up with you and what you're doing and take advantage of some of this?
Brushbeater.org/training calendar. If you look at the training calendar, I just added a few dates for 2023 today, and I travel everywhere. I'm getting ready to be wheels up and head out to Idaho. I'm going to be out there for a week teaching RTO, advanced RTO, and signals intelligence course. I will be back here. I've got the first half of 2023 is up now. I have a regular podcast that I do, Radio Contra, which both of you joined me on.
That's right.
Way back when.
Awesome.
It feels like it was forever ago, back in episode 97. And, we're closing in on 200 episodes now.
Hot dog.
Yeah, no. I got to get y'all back on.
Yeah, but we're on your tail, NC Scout. We're coming to get you.
That's right. I have to get y'all back on. I just a couple of weeks ago I interviewed Colonel Mike Bennett, the author of the Warlock series. And I was incredibly humbled by that. Being able to get him on. I've interviewed a lot of great people on there. So Radio Contra. And AmericanPartisan.org, which is just a news aggregator of everything that's going on. So your daily situational awareness, your S2 capability at the individual level. When I built all that, I sought to integrate the most amount of information possible, and it's all in an effort to give this community the best that I can.
Fantastic. Thank you for giving back to the community, Scout, and having a venue to offer those critical skills. So I appreciate what you're doing up there. And thanks for coming on today, too. And, we kind of went all over the place. That was good. We needed to do that. And you hit a lot of critical, goings on, that are all over the news. And, so as always, I'm a better man for hearing you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Pinelander podcast. And if you enjoy our content, we hope you'll check out our sponsors. Blacksmith Publishing has been serving the warrior class since 2013. We have great titles written by warriors for warriors. If you're looking for a great reference book or just want to unwind at the G-Base with a great novel, be sure to check out the bookstore located at blacksmithpublishing.com. We're adding titles all the time. And if you're looking for some cool Pinelander apparel, head on over to the general store at pinelander1776.com. We appreciate guys grabbing some of the cool swag there and wearing that stuff. And until our next meeting, remember, keep your head on a swivel, stay mentally and tactically smart, physically and spiritually strong, and socially astute. To each other we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. God bless Pineland.